Welcome everyone to today's Kernel of Knowledge webinar. All participants have been muted upon entry in order to cut down on background noise. If you have questions or comments, please go ahead and type them in the chat box. You may need to exit the full screen mode of Zoom in order to access the chat box easily. You can usually do that and usually in the upper right hand part of the screen. I'll be monitoring the chat box while Juana is talking, but she won't be keeping an eye on that. So I will ask questions of her at the end or maybe in the middle. I think she said that was okay if something came up. And we are recording. So this webinar is being recorded for the National Network of Libraries of Medicine YouTube channel. It will be available for future viewing, so you'll have access to the content if there's things that you would like to review later. I am Bobby Newman, and this is a Kernel of Knowledge webinar series from the National Network of Libraries of Medicine, Greater Midwest region. And I'm very excited today to have our guest speaker, Juana Hodge, here. When I was asking around for someone to speak about cultural humility, she came highly recommended. No pressure, no pressure. But I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and let her start sharing hers so we can engage with her content.
All right, so share the screen. Okay.
There we go. Yep, we can see it.
Okay, so hello everyone. I am just going to minimize this so I don't see you all, but you all can see me. So I will go ahead and get started. I have a tendency to talk very, very quickly when I am nervous and anxious, and I am both right now here today. So my name is Juana Hodge. I currently work at Upstate Medical University in the Health Sciences Library. I am one of the academic and research librarians. I like to acknowledge the main contributors, Lorelei Rutledge and Alpha Muldoon, librarians at the University of Utah. I was the diversity resident librarian there when we started doing research into this and started presenting on this. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge the Onondaga Nation, the indigenous people on whose ancestral lands SUNY Upstate Medical University Health Sciences Library now stands. And I also like to acknowledge that it is LGBTQIA+ Pride Month this month, and I like to highlight transgender, queer, gender non-binary, bisexual, asexual, pansexual folks who also have different identities such as immigrants, refugees, sex workers, people with disabilities, seniors, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and those with other intersecting identities that have been and continually censored or erased. And I also like to acknowledge that it's National Caribbean American Heritage Month. And so if you hear an accent, it's because I am from the U.S. Virgin Islands, St. Thomas to be exact. And so I like to highlight and acknowledge all the Caribbean people out there. Thank you for joining in and those who's going to be listening to this recording later on. And as Bobby mentioned, you can put things into the chat box. I would also like to say that if you think about asking a question and it could be easily answered through using a search engine, just please do just brief Google or DuckDuckGo search in order to get the answer to your question. And I acknowledge that I've been presenting on this topic for over 3 years now, but I don't know everything on this topic. So these are some conversation guidelines: respect, listening, I statements. The two that people usually have some questions about when I usually talk about this is make space, take space. So for those whose space typically hasn't been made for, for those typically taking space, for those whose space typically hasn't been made for. So people of color, as well as people from marginalized identities when it comes to presenting or when it comes to asking questions. The color-based space, acknowledging that we do encourage people of color to take space, okay, to ask questions, to engage with this content. And I will say that this is not easy stuff that we're going to be talking about today, but I appreciate everyone who have taken time out of their schedule to be here with me. And these are some ground rules. So acknowledging that we all systematically have have been taught misinformation about our own groups and about members of other groups. This is true for everyone, regardless of our groups. Agree not to blame ourselves or others for the misinformation we have learned. To accept responsibility for not repeating misinformation after we've learned otherwise. Take responsibility for and accept the consequences of your words. Hold leaders accountable. So I'm also encouraging you all to hold me accountable throughout this presentation, and feel free in the end if there's something that I didn't acknowledge or glossed over to let me know. So these are the session outcomes. So this is the reasons why you all are here today, and my goal is to make sure that I have hit these things, probably not in great detail because I was kind of over ambitious when I submitted this to Bobby, but I'm gonna get through all of this. So I like to start off with the ALA Code of Ethics. And so this is the first statement out of the ALA Code of Ethics, and the words that I have bold are all users, equitable service policies, equitable access, unbiased. And so I bolded these things because this is our ethical framework that guides our decision-making process, okay? And equitable does not mean equal. Equal means treating everybody the same. Equitable is meaning treating people the way that they need to be treated. So what goes for one may not go for the others, okay? And unbiased, that is incredibly difficult thing to do, to provide unbiased responses to our requests or unbiased services and resources. Because a lot of the things I'm going to talk about further in this presentation means that how we grew up, through our lifetime, how we grew up have cultivated biases, explicit and implicit biases. And I will touch on that a little bit more. And this is the Medical Library Association Code of Ethics. And so the section I like to highlight is that the health sciences librarian works without prejudice to meet the client's information needs. And so the client can mean the patron, the customer, even each other. And so acknowledging that working without prejudice does take some work, does take acknowledging that we have unconscious or implicit biases, that everyone has them, and accepting that and accepting that, bringing that to the awareness and working on that. And then acknowledging that we are part of the librarianship profession, that we have this professional identity. And if you never heard of this article by Rabazi and Ta, it was published last year in the Library with the Lead Pipe, and it talks about how we feel in terms of librarianship, that it's a sacred calling, that librarianship is inherently good. There's sacred notions, and is above critique or above reproach. And one of the things is to acknowledge that, yes, librarianship is one of the most trusted professions that is out there, but also that libraries are reflections of the society that they live in. And so at a point in time, there were certain populations that was not even happily welcomed in libraries. And so acknowledging that history, but also acknowledging that librarians, library staff, information science staff, that they are worthy of being able to take lunch, being able to be safe and protected, especially those who come from marginalized identities. Now, understanding that culture is our way of living. It is complex, dynamic, continually evolving, and is constantly influenced by our experiences. So I'm going to pose a question to you all, and feel free to utilize the chat box. How many of you would define your culture or American culture? Usually when I ask this question, I get very different answers. No answers was ever the same. And understanding that when I was growing up, that I'm considered a millennial. So when I was growing up in the 90s and 2000s, it was a very different way of living. There are things now that we're experiencing, terminologies that are in existence that wasn't there 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And so acknowledging that culture is not stagnant, okay? And that people, depending on where you were born and or raised, influences how you think of things, okay? And understanding that it leaves kind of a residue, kind of think of it as a cultural residue. And understanding that, throughout life, we kind of come across or have been oppressed by or affected by different isms and phobias. And I appreciate when I did a dry run of this last week that some people pointed out some new ones for me. And so looking at racism, sexism, classism, sizeism, ableism, ethnocentrism, anti-Semitism, and ageism. And so for those who may have a question about ethnocentrism, because that usually comes up, is ethnocentrism is judging another culture solely by the values and standards of their own culture, okay? And acknowledging that there is a religious bias that is there as well, and understanding that there are phobias, so homophobia, Islamophobia, xenophobia, and transphobia, okay? And these are things that as we grew up, and understanding that we are not as individualistic as we think we are. We are not, there's no such thing as, you know, merit, that we just come through our own merit, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. Understanding that some people don't have any boots to start off with, let alone bootstraps, let alone shoestrings, and understanding that the playing field has never been leveled for anyone. It's never been a level playing field. And one of the things is that we're trying to get to that and acknowledging that. And throughout this whole process, I'm going to keep acknowledging that it starts with ourselves first and acknowledging and understanding where we stand in the different systems of oppression there are. So now, you're probably thinking, why am I spending some time on all of this? But it goes into understanding cultural humility. And the first thing, one of the first few things is to understand implicit bias or unconscious bias. So most people probably have a familiarity or understanding of it. But for this definition, it is attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding in an unconscious manner. So it can include favorable or unfavorable assessment, activated involuntary without an individual's awareness or intentional control. So implicit bias is different than explicit biases. The explicit biases are the ones that we are unaware of and we have some control over. This is what we think of when we describe somebody as sexist or racist or homophobic. And understanding when it comes to implicit biases, I could say that I prefer mangoes over bananas, okay? The only thing that's going to impact anyone is probably the banana industry, okay? But when we have a preference for those who are younger and slimmer and white and able-bodied, that does affect people's access to quality healthcare, people's access to quality library services and resources. So elements that makes implicit biases unique is that they're pervasive. All of us have countless implicit biases that we have learned over time. They are separate and distinct from implicit biases and beliefs in most cases, and they can take consistent long-term effort to change, but are malleable and can be changed over time. So when I talk about implicit biases, sometimes thought does not translate into action, but understanding that we still have that thought, and sometimes we think of action as being, you know, something that we do, but sometimes, you know, when we decide not to do something, we decide not to engage with a patron, we decide not to acknowledge someone, that is still something that a choice, a decision that we have made, and we have to understand why we made that decision and understand that there are impacts of that. So some examples of implicit biases. So this was a 2012 case study that was done, and it was regarding the healthcare industry. And so case finance was given to pediatricians for 4 common pediatric conditions. And so it showed the pediatricians with a pro-white implicit bias were more likely to prescribe painkillers for white patients as opposed to black. So vignettes are just a brief description or account or episode. So these were given to pediatricians for them to decide who were they more likely to provide medication, painkillers to. Another case, this is actually a systematic review, and so the evidence showed that healthcare professions exhibit the same levels of implicit bias. So it means that because you are a physician or whether you're a librarian or library staff, doesn't mean that all of a sudden all of your biases and prejudices are wiped clean. once, depending on what profession that you were part of. You still have the same level of implicit bias as the wider populations, and that biases are likely to influence diagnosis and treatment decisions. And so one of the things that in this article that they are asking for more research is on what this looks like in actual care settings, and greater homogeneity and methods testing implicit biases in healthcare. Now this one has to do with the legal system, okay? So this one, they looked at criminal sentencing and Afrocentric feature bias. Afrocentric features such as dark skin, wide nose, full lips. And so when they control for different numerous factors, they still found that individuals with the most prominent Afrocentric features received longer sentences than their less Afrocentrically featured counterparts. Okay, so that means just based on luck of the draw, if you happen to be of a lighter skin tone, you know, smaller nose, okay, smaller lips, that you have a less sentencing than those who do not. Okay, and for a lot of people, this is a serious thing that we need to acknowledge in our systems and in our society. Some examples in the library, or like how implicit biases might play out in the library world, is varying levels of comfort with cultures different outside of their own. Understanding that we will never experience what everyone else has experienced, but also being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Understanding that you don't always need to feel comfortable in order to engage with someone in a respectful manner and giving them the basic dignity and respect that they owed. Declaring that a patron's name is too difficult to pronounce or to spell. Failing to support boisterous patrons, whether they are young adults or they're students, or they might be older adults. Making assumptions about the home life or culture of the patrons. Sometimes we do this in a snap. It just happens. And that colors the level of interaction and service that we can provide to that patron, and being able to relate to diverse life experiences. All of us were born, we went through puberty, some of us came through it unscathed, some did not, but understanding that we all have different life experiences, not negating someone else's by saying, you know, this is a post-racial society, or I don't see color, or I don't see difference, because then you are basically erasing my identities, and some of my identities that are important to me and how I navigate this world. But also understanding that relating to people is just because they're people. Okay, and understanding that. And then once we understand that we all have biases, what the definition of implicit biases are and explicit bias, looking at the implicit association test. So this might be familiar to a lot of people, and this might be new to some. But the IAT works by measuring how quickly you can relate specific kind of words with other words. As the name implies, the implicit association test does not measure biases or prejudices that one is aware of, but rather measures the strengths of associations between concepts that we are unaware of. The reason we do this indirect measurement is because biases are unconscious, so most people are unable to tell others accurately what their biases might be. And so on the screen, it is a picture of a black face, and in the corners there's African American or good, and then European American or bad. And this is taken from the race IAT. And so what it does is that it has you using a keyboard or whatever system that you're using, rate how quickly it is that you're able to associate African American with good, or European American with bad, or European American with good, and African American with bad. Okay, so this is just one of the ways, and there's a lot of people who contest the implicit association test. I just say, one, just take it in, if you've never taken it before, don't take it in a group, because depending on what your results are, you may feel uncomfortable, ashamed, guilt, and you know, the emotions run the gamut. But understanding that this is just one of, you know, a few ways that I'm going to talk about it, how you can begin to get at the implicit biases that we hold. Another one is different privilege checklists. So you probably heard of Peggy McIntosh and unpacking the invisible accent. And so this is just a white privilege checklist along with the able-bodied one and a thin privilege checklist. And so this is a way for you to be able to go through this checklist and talk and see, do you have this privilege? Okay. So one example for the thin privilege checklist is that I can go home from meetings, classes, and conversations and not feel excluded, fearful, attacked, isolated, outnumbered, unheard, held at a distance, stereotyped, or feared because of the size of my body. For the able privilege checklist, part of your bodies or extensions of your bodies are not referred to as that thing. And from the white privilege checklist, I can go home from most meetings of organizations I belong to feeling somewhat tied in, rather than isolated, out of place, outnumbered, unheard, held at a distance, or feared. So with that, I am going to exit out, and I'm going to have you all do a little activity. So you all probably thought that you would be here not doing anything. So what I have sent you is a link, and if you have access to a computer to be able to bring it up, because of what I'll have you doing, and I'll give you a few minutes to do it, and I'll talk through what the responses have been from other people who've done this exercise. Is that you can, I'm going to have you think about what are your 3 most salient identities, important identities. So I want you to take the time based on the wheel to think about what are those identities that you hold most close to you. What are they? And think about why are they your most precious or important identities. Because one of the things that I have realized is that a lot of people do not get the opportunity to actually do this kind of work. Okay, so, and I acknowledge the fact that for some of you may be listening over the phone, you may not have access to Google Drive, or you might be doing this in a group setting, and it may not work for you all to do this, but I just want you to have at least a minute or two to really think about what are your identities. Usually in a group setting, I would give people this paper, and then I would have them write down their identity. With their identity, if it has more privilege, it would be closer to the inside of the wheel, and if it had less privilege, it would be closer to the outside of the wheel. And then I'll still have them think about, choose 3 out of the many listed there, and then, present to the classroom why it is one of their most salient identities. And so I've had people who talked about things that was not a part of their visible identity. And so there's a difference between invisible minorities and visible minorities. And some of these things are things that can change. So in terms of social and economic status, your age changes, okay? Education, language in certain cases, your physical ability, it can change and does change over time. Your community support, in terms of like how much support that you have in the community to be able to find places, clothing, activities that support and validate your many different identities. Your religion can change over time, your sexuality, and more. So now that I've talked your ear off about biases, what they are, how to go about identifying them, what are some bias reducing strategies? And so for this, I'm going to go a little bit quickly. You all will be getting a copy of my slides that actually in the notes section explains each of these. So the first one is the stereotype replacement. Recognize that a stereotype has been activated, think about why, and then actively substitute a non-stereotypical thought. The counter-stereotype imaging one is imagine an individual situation that counteracts your stereotype reaction in great detail. Individuation is recognized when you have stereotyped someone according to their group affiliation, and then try to think about the things that make them an individual. And then perspective taking is thinking about what would it be like to be a member of that group. Positive contact. So increasing opportunities for positive contact with members of a stereotype group. Finding opportunities to meet people who are different. Recategorization is intergroup contact that induces members of different groups to recategorize themselves as a member of the same, more inclusive group. And then interpersonal interactions and cross-group friendships. Intergroup contact can lead to interpersonal interaction, providing opportunity for members of one group to develop positive emotional reactions and recognize individual attitudes. And cross-group friendships involved are cascading. Cross-group friendships have cascading effects because friends of those involved in cross-group friendships are affected by the knowledge that their friends have close relationship with out-group members. Now, probably on to what you all have been waiting for from probably like slide 5, culture humility. But before I get to that, I'm going to go over cultural competency within the librarianship context. So Patricia Overall, she wrote this article about 10 years ago that cultural competency is the ability to recognize the significance of one's culture in their own life as well as lives of others, come to know respect, diverse cultural backgrounds, being able to fully integrate the culture of others into services, work, institutions, and it enhances lives of those served by the librarianship profession, the library profession, and those engaged in service. And cultural humility incorporates a lifelong commitment to self-evaluation and self-critique, and it's redressing the power imbalances in the patient-physician dynamic and developing mutually beneficial and non-paternalistic partnerships with communities on behalf of individuals and defined populations. And so this is Tavlon and Murray Garcia's definition. Now, this is a combined definition that I like to incorporate and present on because it captures a lot of things, and I'll be looking at culture competency and culture humility in a second. So culture humility is also being other-oriented, so being patron-centered, customer-oriented, honoring who that person is and what they bring, their lived experiences, not think just because somebody has a credential that it is valued more than someone's lived experiences. Engaging in constant and consistent self-reflection, expressing respect and lack of superiority even when cultural differences are present. So what are some of the differences? So for cultural competencies, there's best practices from an objective point of view. So there's this notion that we can be objective, that objectivity is possible, or that neutrality is possible, when when we actually know that this is not the case. And looking at it from cultural competence, looking at it from you are the expert point of view, that you're learning everything that you can about someone else's culture. And then there's an end product. Okay, and there's many other comparisons that others can make between the two or define cultural competency. But when I think of competency, I think of an endpoint, that there's a checklist, that there's these lists of things that all you need to do is know that, okay, they're a collectivist culture, they have a very low high pain threshold and more. Okay, whereas for cultural humility, it's about self-awareness. Okay. Intellectual humility, understanding that we cannot know everything there is to know about someone else's culture or their identities, okay? Honoring what it is that they bring to this interaction. Understanding that power and privilege is a part of every interaction and situation that we encounter. And this is ongoing reflection, that this is something that does not stop. But also it is being mindful, okay? Challenging your assumptions, understanding that by the end of this presentation, you're not going to be able to say, yes, I can now integrate cultural humility into everything that I do. Or yes, that, I am culturally humble. The goal of this presentation was to introduce, for those of you who, if this is your first time hearing about it, for those who might have more intermediate understanding or involvement with this, kind of looking at it deeper and questioning some of the things that we've learned. For every presentation that I've done on this, I'm always learning and looking at current things that has come out about culture competency, about culture humility, implicit biases, and more. That this takes active engagement that is not just passive, okay? That you have to be working through with this. And this is lifelong learning. There's no point, there's no checklist, stopping point. It's about being open, openness, okay? Being vulnerable, okay? Acknowledging when you don't know something. And for those of you who are library staff, you understand that we do not know the answer to every question, and sometimes there's not, the answer that we have is not the answer that people want, okay? Understanding that, you know, you're gonna make mistakes and being okay with it, okay? Knowing when to apologize. That is about having a reflective practice. You know, when we think about what works, what doesn't work, okay, how we could have said this better, was there another way, was there something, was a bias, a potential implicit bias that was reframing or having you look at this in a particular lens or perspective or point of view, okay? Journaling, one of the things that I do is that I have a journal that I take time, whether it is in the morning or on my way home from work, I think about things and then I write them down. About the interactions that I've had with people, the thought that I've been like, oh snap, I could have said that differently, I could have done that differently. And visualization, okay? Visualizing, which is very similar to the individuation, but visualizing people as different people and their different identities and things that they enjoy, their hopes, wish, dreams, desires, okay? That we are more than just what people see us. And so a reflective practice means that you simply think on an ongoing basis. And one of the things that might be challenging is that you have so much on your plate to do, that you're probably running from meeting to meeting to meeting. You have LibGuides to update, you have patients to see, you're rounding, you're doing so many different things on a daily basis. But that goes against you if you don't build in time to just sit, process, breathe, okay? Having a reflective practice, you think on an ongoing basis about your thoughts, words, actions, behaviors, and their effects. It's a necessary tool for continual growth and self-awareness and self-improvement. So some strategies for trainings and more. So using a non-dominant first-person perspective. So a lot of the times when we are developing content, when we are using examples for generating searchable keywords and things of that nature, we have a tendency to use things that we are familiar with, that we are used to, that is neutral or non-threatening, or sometimes we just don't know what else is out there to use. Lived experience. Acknowledging it has just as much merit and worth as anyone with credentials. Encouraging groups to explain their reasoning. So this is why when I have people do the privilege and identity wheel, that I have people think about why. Why is this your most important or one of your most important identities? Because sometimes for some people they have everyone have the privilege of thinking about certain things, of not thinking about certain things. Using examples that reverse common stereotypes. So a lot of the times we think media has just such a huge impact on us, but it's just more of like what we select to listen to, and that we're not adhering to group thinking or echo chambers, that we are challenging the type of things, search result sets that comes up. That we are not just adhering or just listening to what other people have to say based on their experiences with people who are different from them in variety of ways. Discussing race, social class, and privilege. So it's really and truly having those difficult conversations. The last time that I gave this presentation, we ended up talking for a good while afterwards about how can we talk about whiteness, how we can talk about racism, how we can talk about classism and these challenging things in librarianship. When there was no class in any of my programs, any of the formal education that I went through that talked about, your identities and the impact that it has on how people perceive you. Because you're looking at me right now, I cannot see any of you all, okay? I look young. I look like a student. And for me, I used to think that that was a bad thing because I'm like, I am a librarian, I know my stuff, and I came to the grips that I'm a student of life, lifelong learning. It's not a bad thing to look like a student, because when we think of students, some people think of that they are immature, that they don't know as much as anyone else, that they may not have enough life experiences, and that they're always young. And so I come to the fact that if somebody calls me a student, you know what, it is totally fine, but also acknowledging, but correcting them on the fact that this is who I am, and this is what I bring to the table, okay? I'm also a Black Afro-Caribbean woman, and so I say Afro-Caribbean because of where I come from, of my roots being in the Caribbean, okay? So some next steps. So community involvement. So some people are already doing this, being involved in their community, but also acknowledging that there's this historical and current trauma that has happened, okay? That every institution, a lot of institutions are not held blameless for the distance that might occur between communities or the institutions that you live and work in. Okay, and so understanding that sometimes you can't always just come to someone's front steps and expect them to just welcome you with open arms. That there is a past and a present that is affecting the relationship. So understanding what that is and not treating people like they're walking encyclopedias, that they're just here to educate you on one thing and then you just show them away. Okay, it's about building deep, long-lasting relationships. Okay. Defying stereotypes by creating exhibits and holding events, something that we have been doing for a long time, but also looking at our policies and procedures and see how does that affect us being able to do this. Okay, are we shying away because it might make certain people uncomfortable? What are the politics involved? Because there's politics in everything. And to be able to say there is not, that's a level of privilege that you have. Provide opportunities for positive encounters, making sure that it's a safe and brave space, but understanding that safe is a matter of perspective. What might be safe for somebody may not be safe for someone else. Promote implicit bias awareness and cultural humility on a programmatic level, okay? So understanding, like, you know, one diversity training is not going to be enough. And in some cases, it actually, you know, have people doubling down, you know, on their feelings and their thoughts and their preconceived notions about certain things. Okay, bringing it to the awareness, making sure that it is what, if you're working in an institution that maybe you're in a tenure track position or you have some kind of performance review involved, how is content around diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility interrelated into those things? How are we talking about acknowledging the impact that culture has on us and our role in the culture and the society that we live in? Questioning how your biases may affect the services you provide at your library. Remembering that learning happens through discomfort. And I'm just checking the time to make sure I don't go over. A critical analysis of ourselves. We are not beyond reproach. There's a lot of things that has happened this year that has me just drawn aback. But also it doesn't surprise me either, because we are human beings and we will make mistakes, and we are the product of the societies that we live in, okay? But understanding what is our role in these different systems of oppression. And you can think of the systems of oppression akin to the slide that I talked about, that I showed you all about the different biases and phobias. Okay, for some people, how they navigate the world, it is much, much easier than others. And some people have had the opportunity of not thinking about this. And I say that is because when I moved from being in a minority-majority island, where I went to graduate school at the University of Washington, I was one of 3 Black students in my class, in my cohort. And so for me, that was very shocking, because I never had to deal with being, you know, the only one in certain instances. And even at my current institution, I'm the only Black librarian. And so that provides a certain level of awareness, of consciousness that I'm navigating the world through. And understanding that some people are doing that, okay? Further discourse around critical race theory, whiteness, white privilege, and what fragility. I'm happy to say that there was a book that was published called Topographies of Whiteness that was published in 2017 that is out, and Robin DiAngelo has recently published a book called White Fragility, looking at social justice. And there is different courses through Library Juice Academy, I believe, that has different courses, even a certificate on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and looking at critical librarianship. Okay, understanding that we need to do this work, that is important to do this work. That for me, I've been in this profession for almost 4 years. And I've been doing work around EDI for a little bit longer, but understanding that it takes more than just one person. And it takes all of us being uncomfortable. I can't tell you how uncomfortable I am. Last time, and when I gave a presentation at a conference about 2 weeks ago, I was telling them there was nothing around equity, diversity, inclusion, or accessibility that was available for someone to learn from in a particular region or organization. And so for people who do this work and do it because they want to, not because they want to, because they want to see a difference, but understanding that it's not just 4 people, 2 people. That for people of color, for those from marginalized identities, they're coming into a profession that was never really meant for them. So they have a lot of work that they're doing, a lot of navigation that has to happen. And so some takeaways, except that we do in fact have biases, and to make ourselves aware of them. Determine not only to unearth our own stereotypes, but also to challenge them, to exchange our automatic biases for different, more inclusive notions, to be a part of the conversation, and understanding that that the first step to adopting, implementing, integrating, whatever word that you want to use, culture of humility, is that self-awareness piece. And in order to get to that self-awareness piece, to have as truly accurate self-estimation of ourselves as possible, we have to acknowledge the fact of that our friends, our circle, our lifestyles, our culture, the effect that it has on us. And so you guys are going to get a copy of this. And so these were just some activities that I pulled out that you can do at your own workplace or wherever you are. And this is I just wanted to highlight this upcoming webinar, or series of webinars. So 9 conversations that matter to health sciences librarians with Jessica Pettit. And so this is a link to it that you can click on and learn more about this. And this goes over the course of a year from this summer to next summer. So these are some of the resources that I have identified for you all, and these are previous conversations around cultural competency, cultural humility, and cultural intelligence through NLM as well as the American Library Association. And these are my references. As you all know, as a librarian, I try to contribute as much as possible. And lastly, if we can't see a problem, we can't fix a problem. Kimberly Crenshaw, who will be presenting at the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Accessibility in Libraries Conference in Ohio in August. And I'd like to acknowledge the work that Nikki Andrews and Sunny Kim has done around this, because they had presented a workshop on cultural humility at JCLC, the Joint Conference of Librarians of Color, September of last year, which was amazing. And now to questions, and this is my contact information, and this is my Twitter handle, and I'm going to put this back up so that I can see questions. And I think we have time for 16 minutes for questions, and so lay it on me.
Yep, thank you so much. That was wonderful. We do have time for questions, so if you have questions, please go ahead and type them in the chat box. Alternatively, are you watching the chat box now too, Tawana?
Yes.
Okay. You can also send them, I guess, privately to either one of us. So yeah, that was really great. I think you gave us a lot of great resources that we can use on our own to explore the particular parts of areas of interest. And I was glad to see the Harvard implicit bias study. I feel like that's been around forever, but I know it hasn't. And so it's really great to see that out there as a tool for people to use. Everyone's just saying thank you right now.
Oh, well, well, I want people to push back and challenge me. Did I, meet the outcomes that I set, the initial things that I said that I would do? Thank you. I don't think that I'm smart. I just know how to find a lot of really great things and be connected to wonderful people. So how do we extend this to working with our students and our faculty? So one of the things, I think what I might do is that I have a MLA folder with so many, I can't tell you how many articles around cultural humility, about integrating it into clinical work, because a lot of this was derived from the healthcare side of things, that I can share with you all, but also looking at when it comes to our students, when we're working with our students, what do we see when we work with them? Okay, understanding what are their identities, talking about like whiteness, talking about what is our, how do we walk through this world? How do we see things? Because how you see things is not the way that I see things. And so how do we get people to start acknowledging that? And I think is to pose a question and to use maybe some of the conversation guidelines for the ground rules to start with that. But I think it's also to identify allies and champions, where you could start thinking about how we can integrate this into the classroom. And it could be as simple as a reflection activity where you pose a question to the students and you have them answer it. And you have them look at resources regarding other people's identities, and see like how does that reinforce it or challenge their preconceived notions around this. And it could be done for students and faculty. And I'm going to be on a little after 4 o'clock because I see some questions that are coming in right now. How do you help white patrons who are angry about reaching out to others? For example, how come you have that in Spanish and not English? It's hard because I think, and I'm going to say something that if you want to totally disagree with me, I am open to it. I hate generalizing, but for the sake of it, I will, is that others, people of color, people from marginalized identities they've from a long time know what their identities are and understand that things have not been cultivated or developed with them in mind. And I think for white patrons who may be angry about things being available to others and not to them, I think that is that moment when they are understanding that it's not about me. And so they're trying, and that is like how they react to things. So how they react to things is not always the best thing, but to basically tell them that, we might have a greater Spanish-speaking population than we do English-speaking population, or that we are trying to highlight certain resources that we have. I think when it comes to people who are angry, asking them, well, thank you for telling me, sharing your emotions with us, but this is, the policy, this is our stance, so this is what we're doing, and I will leave it at that. I'm interested in teaching health sciences students about the importance of patient education and taking health literacy into account. I can integrate cultural humility into this. So when we think about health literacy, the ability to be able to navigate the healthcare system, when it comes to appointments, when it comes to referrals, and even just with the paying for our healthcare, I think understanding like, for people who might be immigrants. So whether you're coming from Europe to America, it's a vastly different system. Okay, so taking into account, like looking at how is the healthcare system different in different, how is the healthcare system different in other places where your populations are coming from, and how can you have the students think about, when you think of an immigrant, when you think of somebody who is a refugee, they have very specific ways that they're thinking about. But when they become from a teen to adult, they themselves are in charge of their own healthcare. So for them to think about, like, it's kind of the same thing that others are doing. Hopefully I answered your question, Annie. Medical school is very wide. I acknowledge that. If I'm remembering correctly. So for me, culture competency seems as though that there is an end point. And the article that I referenced, that there's an end product, that you're culturally competent, that you know everything there is to know about First Nations, Native American, American Indian populations and taking care of them. Where culture of humility is operating on the premise that there is no end, that culture changes, that how you even call certain populations have changed it in one generation, to be really and truly. I love Dr. Nicole Cook. And so, yeah, so you can be culturally competent in one context and completely incompetent in another. But cultural humility is saying that, you know, understanding that we do not know that there is everything when it comes to a particular culture or maybe even identity, whether it is context dependent or not, and that in certain situations the context can change drastically, or the situation can change drastically. And I'm hoping, Jordan K., that I'm answering this well enough. And if not, feel free to find me offline and we can engage in this even more. Building in cultural change and promoting reflective practices might be resistant. So really challenging, why are they resistant? For me, it's always interesting to know, why are you unwilling to see my perspective or understand why diversity is important? So for them to even just posing the question was like turning it back on them for the most part. Why are you resistant? And understanding, like, who is resistant to this? Are these the people who are in power? Are there policies, procedures, strategic plans, mission and vision statements that says that, you know, we uphold diversity? And so in that case, it might be a matter of holding them accountable and being transparent about these series of things that is happening. How do we get those who are not part of the choir to participate in these types of trainings? So one of the things that I've found is looking at our benchmark institutions. So a lot of the things when I'm looking at developing particular services or looking at sessions, I look at other institutions to see what it is that they're doing. And so usually for like accreditation, they have like peer institutions or aspirational institutions or benchmark institutions. But I also, working in a medical institution, operating on this premise of like evidence-based practice. So looking at what does the literature have to say, scholarly peer review literature have to say about incorporating this, and then being able to send that to your supervisor, send that to your colleagues, saying that, hey, you know, based on Yale University, they've done blah, 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 and then here is a slew of scholarly peer-reviewed articles, authoritative articles, or this one key person who is doing this work and the impact that is having on this, the patient care, the institution, working with your colleagues. How can we educate others without making them defensive? I wish I knew the answer to that question. I would think I'm going to have to think about that. But thinking about, like, why do we get defensive? So because someone might be questioning a long-held belief or understanding of ours, and looking at, and for them to take that time to process, what is that? A lot of the times people are defensive because that's their main mechanism of dealing with something that is uncomfortable. And one of the things that I mentioned is the upcoming webinar. So one of the things that I've done is that I'm continuously learning about different things, even about culture competency, even about culture humility. There's so many things that's left to learn and understand, and to engage with others. And that is something that I'm trying to do. And so making sure that that is built into your professional development. if at all possible. Okay. Any tips on how managers, department heads can build culture, competency, values into library unit or department's culture? So I acknowledge that it is 3:55, and so I appreciate everyone who is here, and I'm going to try to continue to answer the rest of the questions. And so if you have to leave, feel free to leave. Let's see. Thank you. It was worth all of the stress and the work, because I didn't know how this was going to go, because every presentation is a little different. Managers can build cultural competency values into the library unit or department's culture. So one of the things that can be done is simply asking people what are their understanding or beliefs or regarding diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, cultural competency, cultural humility. I think we assume that people know these things, because there's always this assumption that they know this, that they understand this, or they understand your rationale or your reasoning behind of these things, and some people don't. And so a lot of the times we have to bring evidence, that evidence-based practice, that evidence-based medicine. So one of the things that some people they think with their hearts, and some people think with their heads, and some people think with a combination of both. So I think when it's talking to department heads, deans, or anyone in a managerial or professional level, it is gathering data as well as anecdotes about the rationale and the reasoning for these things and the impact that it has. So one of the things is collegiality. So being able to understand if somebody is you might perceive somebody to be aggressive, but they might be passionate, and sometimes it could be understanding that if somebody, that they might be code switching, or they might not be engaging in certain events with their colleagues because they don't feel accepted, that there's a chilly climate, around certain things, or they don't fit in well. So I think it's understanding, what do we mean about cultural competency? What exactly do we want our library unit or department culture to be like, and how would you define it as well? I am someone who's invested in cultural. So no, I am someone who's invested in cultural humility, similar to how people include pronouns in their email signatures or on I haven't thought about that in terms of I'm someone invested in culture, humility. I mean, you could be super creative and create a sign and be like, culture, humility is what I practice. And I think that is one of the ways, but in terms of with email signature or ID tag, it could even just be a definition of it and a link to more resources or the article, depending on which definition that you want to adopt or support. Need to get away. Do you have a book to recommend for general reading or group to discuss? So there's 2 books that has been published. The one is called Developing Cultural Competency, and there is another one that is lingering somewhere in my office that I will find and provide with you all as well. Yes, so all cultures have biases. And even within different groups, there are biases about different identities. So in terms of, say, the Black community, for instance, the support for LGBTQT is much better than it was before. But this is why intersectionality, that's why I love Kimberly Crenshaw, is really, really important, because there's times when people will say, Black lives matter, but understanding when it came to the, in history, what am I thinking about? When it came for rights for people of color, when it came to rights for women, it was such at a disparate differences. And so it's really looking at these identities at different crossroads, and depending on the situation or the context, depending on the situation or context, they are different. They have different levels of privilege and opportunities. Okay, it's 4 o'clock. I just want to acknowledge that, but feel free to send me any questions as well. I appreciate you all taking the time to listen to me talk about something that I'm very, very interested in. Bobby will be sending out an email, and in that email, I'm going to be asking for separate feedback. Just kind of like one thing that you learned, one thing that was unclear, maybe you wanted to learn more about, or something that you wanted to push back about or challenge. I'm open to this because I'm really looking forward into learning more about like what are some a framework that can be cultivated for librarianship, but also looking at doing more research into this. So like I said, you guys have been really, really wonderful. I don't know what my face looks like. I probably will never look at this recording, to be honest, but I appreciate all the time and the wonderful comments and questions, and I threw a lot of information about you to you all, but in the end, I just want you all to realize that we all have a role to play, and the first step is figuring out what our identities are, what and how they affect the society that we live in, and understanding that there's many things that we need to do going forward, and not being frightened of that and leading into our discomfort and being uncomfortable, and understanding that in order to provide the best possible service, that we need to start with ourselves first. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Twana. This was wonderful, and thank you for sticking around a little extra to answer all the questions. Very gracious of you. So I'm going to go ahead and just share a quick thing from my screen, from those of you who are still hanging around, sort of what's next. So for anybody who is interested in CE, I will go ahead and send that out to you guys. Look for it in the email with the link to the YouTube recording. I'm also going to be sharing with you the survey that Twana has designed and would like your feedback on, and I think her PowerPoint slides too. So keep an eye out for those things for me, probably next week, guys. Don't get too excited. But what next? If you're not familiar with the National Network of Libraries of Medicine, please join our network. It's free, and there's wonderful rewards for it. Okay, not really, but you can order these cool posters. Check out the webinars and classes that we have coming up. Twana mentioned one that we have coming up with Jessica. That'll be an ongoing series over the next year surrounding cultural humility and cultural awareness that I think is great. So that's it for my spiel. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to stop recording.
Thanks for watching. This video was produced by the National Network of Libraries of Medicine. Select the circular channel icon to subscribe to our channel. Select a video thumbnail to watch another video from the channel.